When a gacha game shuts down, that's it. No more game. Everything you bought or obtained within the game is no longer accessible, and any content surrounding said game will be gone. The community will eventually stop talking about it, and the game itself becomes lost media that will be lost to time. I've had the pleasure to take a look at some of these lost games over the years, and it's a shame that a lot of the best music, story, characters, and atmosphere in this niche of mobile games become erased. Some developers have had the foresight to implement offline modes, but most don't, as there's no legal regulations that mandate the preservation of an online game. Although, what if that were to change? There's a movement in the EU that's been making the rounds recently. Spearheaded by Ross from YouTube channel Accursed Farms, the movement has made progress towards getting approved. As of earlier this year, there was a proposed bill in the California Legislative Assembly as a partnership to stop killing games by some of its advocates. The Protect Our Games Act, if successfully passed, would mandate online video games to provide end-of-life support for its customers starting from 2027. The developer would have to give a 60 days warning when the game will be closing and what to expect after that period. Once the game ends, the developer must supply one of the following. 1. A version of the game that the purchaser can use independently from the developer. 2. An update to the purchaser's version of the game that allows independent use. Or 3. A full refund to everything the purchaser bought throughout the course of their time during the live game. This means that unless the developers are willing to refund literally every penny made on the game, they will have to create an offline mode for it, or provide the means for its customers to host or obtain a working version like a private server that the developer is not affiliated with. Yes, this means that when an online game shuts down, the developer is mandated by law to provide a version of the game that you can still play if you were a customer. This sounds like the perfect solution to some of the more niche gacha games that have disappeared over the years, as no such laws prevented the game to go offline without any preservation. The big question is, does the bill actually apply to gacha games? If that's the case, we'll need to determine, based on the initiative, if gacha games fall under the category of games it's meant to protect, in what ways is it relevant, and the likelihood if it'll succeed with its goal. Can Stop Killing Games truly save gacha games from being shut down? Before I begin, I would like to say that I'm no legal expert or a game developer, so most of the factual information will be quoted from either the bill itself or Ross's YouTube channel. There are also certain corporate interests that are attempting to prevent this bill from being passed, with one notable case from a group called Entertainment Software Association lobbying against the motion. But as of right now, the bill has been passed to the assembly floor. This is also not considering certain valid critiques of this movement, as I'm sure indie developers may have more information on things happening behind the scenes that this bill can cause further complications for them. Alright, so a late edit here, right before the video goes live. Bill AB-1921 has now been passed. It's already in effect. I'm not entirely sure if it will apply to gacha games, but I'll try to explain my reasoning and understanding if it does apply. In any case, let's circle back to how the bill may affect gacha games. I'll first start by defining certain criteria of what counts as a game that's been killed and what's expected that the developer should provide. The bill aims to ensure that if you paid money on a product, there needs to be a functional version of the product that you will have access to indefinitely. The direct wording is that the game must be in a reasonably playable state. Now, the word reasonable can seem vague, as not all portions of the game can be compatible with an offline server, so it's likely one or two features will have to go. The original idea is that as long as you can still do what was advertised you can do within the game, when it was live, then that's counted as being preserved. Although there may be edge cases surrounding this. Let's say in 10 years, the gacha game Epic 7 shuts down and announces an offline server. All of its story, game modes, and characters will be preserved, but due to certain server restrictions, the PvP mode is gone. How might people react? Some may think that at least the creative aspects of the game is still there, then there's no problem. Some may argue that without PvP, the game isn't Epic 7 anymore, as PvP represents a big chunk of the game's identity. Do gacha games even apply under these new rules? Well, the bill states that the cases where a game is exempt is that 1. If the game had a subscription-based service, meaning that you have to pay a sub to play it at all. 2. The game was completely free without any consideration for monetization. 3. The game cannot be affected by the seller after the purchase, and would always be available after the purchase to download. Luckily, gacha games don't fall under any of the categories. The game may be free to download, but it absolutely tries to monetize through the in-game cash shop. Although, there is a very possible loophole here that since the game itself is free to download, you can argue that, well, when we offered or advertised the game, we're not considering charging you money. The premium currency and skins within the game are separate from what we offered or advertised, as they're optional purchases. So as long as we don't advertise anything sold within the game, the bill does not apply. I mean, look, if you get lucky, you can get all the characters for free. I think this is a bit of a stretch, as this wouldn't apply to just gacha games. Any online video game that's free to download would be exempt, which I imagine encompasses a large chunk of what the bill is trying to cover. Next, there's no gacha under the sun that's subscription-based, and there's no gacha that's a single purchase only. My belief is that the bill does indeed apply to gacha games. Now, in what ways does it apply? In the case of primarily single-player-centric titles, then the files would just be stored on a storefront like Steam that you can download at any time. Some gacha games have actually done this, like Destiny Child, where before the game shut down, you can request the code that's tagged to your account progression. Then, when the Memorial update hit, you can enter the code and see all the characters and skins you had, as well as read all the story chapters to the point of the shutdown. The gameplay portion is gone, but at least some of the creative aspects of the game are preserved. If the game has multiplayer components, such as the case for MMO/gacha blends like Tower of Fantasy, then the files and instructions for hosting a private server of one's own will be available to download somewhere, and players can join and play on said private servers. Now, something very important I want to talk about is that the Stop Killing Games movement itself is focused on preserving the product that paying customers bought. That's the keyword, paying. It does not require the developer to allow new registrations of users once the game ends. Nowhere in the bill does it state that the game has to have the capability to be distributed to new users. Under these new rules, it's within the developer's discretion to reserve the offline mode of the game to the existing players only. Given that gacha games are free to download, it doesn't mean that you can still sign up to a discontinued game and start playing alongside others. Since you never interacted or made a purchase while the game was live, the developers don't owe you anything. If you try to reverse engineer your own version of a private server with modified mechanics and allow new players to join, the developer can still go after you legally. Of course, if the developer is feeling generous, they could allow that, but it's not required by the bill. There have been examples of gacha games re-releasing a new version of it in its offline state and reselling it as a single purchase product. Another Eden Begins is a standalone version of the gacha game counterpart, Another Eden. After many years of updates and story content, all of it will be preserved in this new single-player title. Octopath Traveler 0, a console version of the gacha game Octopath Traveler Champions of the Continent, will also be available for download and purchase soon. This is allowed, and maybe if you play the gacha game version, you get some exclusive goodies. The original game that catalyzed this movement was the shutdown of a racing game called The Crew. It was single purchase that had multiplayer components, and when Ubisoft announced that the game will be shutting down, then the people that bought it can't access it anymore, even though there's plenty of single-player content that could work in an offline mode. Well, even after the movement forced their hand at preserving the game for its purchasers, you still can't legally buy the game today. It's been delisted. The movement is meant to prevent those that did buy it losing access to the thing they bought. Assuming it works the same way for gacha games, this would mean that your favorite gacha game, no matter how small or niche, would always be available for you to play even when the developer stops support for it. Presumably, you will be free to look at your characters, use them in gameplay, and replay the story content. It's important to reiterate that not all of the mechanics and modes may work, but gone are the days where these games get erased with no way to play them again. If successfully passed, this bill will go into effect starting January 1st, 2027. A last-minute change to the bill states that it used to also apply to games that are live right now, but now only games that are released past 2027 would fall under the bill's effect. For games releasing past that point, this will mean that the developers will have to plan out a way to preserve the game in an independent state if it shuts down. Also worth mentioning that the bill only applies in the state of California. However, since most gacha games put the Americas in one server, I don't see why they would go the extra lengths to make the preserved version of the game for one state only. Now, if you ask me, here are some possible outcomes if the bill passes. 1. The perfect scenario. The bill does exactly what it's intended, and any gacha games from 2027 will have an offline or independent mode after the game shuts down. 2. The worst case scenario. Gacha games may reduce presence in Western markets due to this law, since making a version of the game that has to work after support for it has ended is just too difficult for some developers. Some ambitious gacha games may not have a global server or have its release delayed in order to comply with these regulations. It's a possibility that they just stop releasing gacha games in the EU or states where the bill is in effect. 3. The bill passes, but some developers may find some kind of loophole that either allows them to not make an independent version of the game or does it in a way where they can get away with the bare minimum. Since mobile gacha games are not the original intended target for the Stop Killing Games movement, the way it operates may have different rules than the games the movement is meant to target. If you look very closely at the bill, there's a bunch of sections that were crossed out and corrected. One of the sections used to say that server-connected games were part of the deal, but the correction changed it to digital games. This may be due to the original premise of the movement that meant to target games which got you a license to play rather than thinking that you own it, such as the case with The Crew. Another possibility is that since most gacha developers aren't from the regions where the bill is in effect, it just doesn't apply to them at all. This is only a thing in the EU and California, so developers from Asia are not subject to gaming regulations here. There may be room for argument there that some developers can make to get out of this. As for what these loopholes are, I don't know, but I'm just throwing these ideas out there. There's also a possibility that if the bill passes, a lot of the smaller and more niche gacha games will announce the end of the global servers by December 31st of this year, since they never had the foresight and funding to be able to create an offline mode. So it's time to cut their losses and exit from the global market. As the developers that make these games are overseas, does this movement have any shot of making it to Asia? Personally, I think the chances are extremely slim. Europe and North America have similar gaming cultures, and it's understandable that given the success of Stop Killing Games in the EU, there are many that share its interests. However, this is likely not going to happen in areas like China or Japan, as there are cultural differences, and subjects like this may not be valued as much. Asia may have different opinions on this matter that hinders the reach of the movement over there. You might recall that a couple weeks back, someone worked out a private server for the discontinued gacha game Near Reincarnation. Except some Japanese fans condemned this, saying that it was copyright infringement. If you want to view the story, just watch it online. Man, poor indie game company Square Enix, am I right? Of course, if the Stop Killing Games movement succeeds, then since the developer is required to have a plan ready for the eventual shutdown of the game in the EU and NA regions anyways, they might as well officially patch it the same way in their native servers. Lastly, I want to talk about what a game might do if for whatever reason they don't want to comply and make a separate version after the end of service. You may recall that one of the few ways a game is exempt from the regulations is if the game monetizes through a subscription model. There are some MMOs that do this, but it's incredibly rare. This comes with the assumption that the customer has agreed to the terms to access a certain piece of online content for as long as they pay the sub. If the game is discontinued, then it's natural that the sub would no longer be offered to customers, in which the customer cannot gain access to it anymore. Personally, I would love for the gacha games to go the subscription route, but here's the problem. When a game requires you to pay a sub to play it at all, it means it cannot monetize through other means, aside from maybe selling cosmetics. This means that it will seem more unreasonable if it tries to hunt for whales. You're expected to be able to access the entirety of the game if you pay the sub. So if you sell even more power behind weapons and boosts, that would be extremely unappealing. In other words, I think the subscription model for online games is fair as it actually forces the developer to create content that keeps the game interesting so you keep paying the sub. instead of having ulterior motives in trying to acquire high spenders by making certain upgrades massive power boosts. The thing is that these days, no one wants to pay a sub in order to play a video game. You either charge an upfront fee to get the entire game at once, or you make the game free to download so the cost for entry is low. I would like to see a gacha developer attempt this, but I think it's ultimately extremely unlikely. Ultimately, does the bill have any effect on gacha games? My final answer is that I actually don't know what will happen, as this video was mainly speculation and conjecture based on the bill's description. While I also think the bill has a real shot at passing, this is also only beginning to tackle the predatory nature of the games industry. It was only last year that Genshin Impact started displaying the value of gacha pulls and raid possibilities in real-life money after a complaint forced their hand. Unfortunately, this was only an isolated case and no other title have been mandated to do this. I would personally like to see more consumer-friendly practices change within gacha games, and I think this bill would be the first of many. For any viewers looking in, they might not even want gacha games to be included in the bill. Who the hell wants to save gacha slop? Well hey, regardless of your opinion on gacha games, in Ross's own words,
I don't see why not.
Finally! Now games can collab with Persona 5 without worrying about the game dying. Anyways, let me know what you think of the Stop Killing Games movement in the context of gacha games. If you want to see more analysis-related content on this genre of mobile games, subscribe to the channel. You can support for as little as $2 a month on Patreon. As always, thank you for watching, be sure to spend moderately, and have fun out there.